first of all, this is my first conference as well. As Lisa introduced me, I'm apparently the Impact girl. I might change my email signature when I get back to the office. I am really, really thrilled and excited. I was actually on a 3-week holiday in Vietnam and didn't want to come back from my, Hoi An beach resort back to gloomy Orange. And I think I was an hour back and Lisa goes, oh, by the way, you're interviewing Grace Brennan at the conference. And I was like, oh, brilliant. Okay, I'm glad I came back then. Look, in October 2019, Grace founded the Buy from the Bush campaign, which then followed by Stay in the Bush. Grace is passionate about the power of positive storytelling and community-driven change. And I must say, not only as Impact Girl, but also as a word nerd, you write and speak about regional Australia in such a gentle, honest, and considered tone, and storytelling will be a sort of a key theme throughout this. So welcome. We're so excited that you've joined us from tropical Warren. For those in the room who might not be familiar with Grace Brennan, what is the Grace Brennan elevator pitch?
Shivers. Hi, everyone. I am a mum of 4 kids. I live in Warren, which is northwest of Dubbo. I grew up in the city and am a ring-in to the bush, and I feel very lucky that I fell in love with a farmer and got to live this life and learn from my community. In a professional sense, I founded Buy from the Bush. Before that, I worked in community development, youth engagement and athlete development before a little introduction to startups and building an online platform, which led kind of fortuitously, it was a marriage of all those things that led to Buy from the Bush. And I think I haven't given you an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is you're meant to kind of say, you know how, and you present a problem to the person listening and then you hook them in by solving their problem. And I imagine in this room there might be a few people who, if I can kind of frame it like an elevator pitch, I was a woman who I thought I had some skills and expertise, and I was living in a pretty isolated property in the middle of a drought, and hearing my friends and family in the city talk about drought but miss the point. And I was also witnessing my husband managing all the kind of all the inconsistencies and the unpredictabilities of drought. And I felt like so many women do, I think, when they move from the city to the bush, or maybe even if you've grown up there, that I probably should just get behind him, just kind of facilitate his growth and his success and just be there to kind of pick up the pieces. But as this problem was unfolding before me, being my community suffering from drought, I felt that maybe I should engage with it a bit more and apply these skills that were, necessarily idle because I was looking after a family and a husband. I thought I should get stuck in.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you were a city girl who fell in love with a man who was destined for the land at age 14 after he threw something at you, I believe. And you soon accepted that you will be calling a farm 70 kilometres from Warren in Western New South Wales, your home. You had the honour of giving the 2020 Australia Day address. I've been down a Grace Brennan Google rabbit warren, so bear with me, everyone. And you said about moving to the country, and I quote, "I read Banjo Patterson, I listened to Slim Dusty, and I watched The Man from Snowy River. What else was there to know?" The country life was a simple life, a healthy, balanced life. Within weeks of starting my new life in the bush, these simple preconceptions were challenged in every way. So my question is, what did you quickly learn about living in the bush and about regional communities as a whole, both the positives and also the challenges that you encountered?
I'll start with the challenges because we moved, my husband had a dream of being a farmer from a very young age, and so we moved to his family property, and unfortunately we took on a huge risk to buy into the family business and copped a couple of floods in consecutive years. So I had that instant realisation that things aren't a given, and that we should kind of have to navigate a new path and find purpose when his purpose was so defined before that. I also learnt about isolation and loneliness, but I witnessed determination and hard work and love and friendship or mateship in a way that I hadn't seen before in the city. I think that when you live with constant inconvenience, which you do if you live in the bush, you are conditioned to solve problems and to hook in, to learn to collaborate, to work with each other, which is exactly what this organisation is all about. And that was incredibly inspiring to me. So it was, I suppose, the people that I met that taught me the most, and that has happened over a 15-year period, but I'm reflecting on it now. So it was instant stress, instant responsibility, instant hard work, and along the way, incredible insight and wisdom and joy from living in the bush.
Absolutely. Buy from the Bush started on October 16, 2019. I can't believe how long it's actually been. After you listened to a radio interview with the Prime Minister, who was talking about drought and all the things that were due to be rolled out, but you sensed that there was a critical piece missing from the conversation. What was missing from that narrative, and what were you prompted to do next?
It was this particular conversation that I was listening to kind of went hand in hand with lots of little bits of media that I was picking up, and this WhatsApp loop with my family in the city. And this particular one was really combative, and I was kind of, on the one hand, really grateful to the journalist for pressing the Prime Minister on, he was saying there's a national disaster, and in the cabinet in Canberra you wouldn't know, so what are you doing? So he'd say, we're spending this much money here, and we're spending this much money here. And both of them couldn't really communicate the impact on community, on households, on women, because I think so often when we hear about drought, we see a man in a paddock, we see cracked earth, we see dying stock, but we don't see how it ripples through a community. And I was seeing in Warren that the local store owner had, she let her casual staff go. She was working longer hours. She wasn't turning over her stock. She wasn't going to the trade fairs. People weren't buying her things. As a result, people no longer went in there because they'd seen it all before. The local school fundraiser was cancelled because people weren't buying tickets. A teacher was going back to school early from maternity leave because her partner had to go in search of work. Men were leaving to find machinery jobs, to try and recruit new clients, and women were working harder. And I think supplementary income was becoming the primary income. And all of this was like a picture of collective stress that wasn't being reflected in the media conversations.
Yeah, I actually remember first hearing about Buy from the Bush, and it was my best mate from school sent me the Instagram page, and she said, have you seen this? And my first response was, that's nice. That was my first response. However, just to give an indication as to the initial ripple effect of Buy from the Bush, and I'm going to look down because I'm going to get these stats correct as the impact girl. In the first 6 weeks of the Buy from the Bush campaign, $2.6 million of revenue was generated for businesses featured on our social pages. In that period, 25 jobs were created in rural communities facing drought because of increased sales. More than $320,000 was spent at local Australia Post franchises, benefiting small businesses in small towns. Businesses reported an average revenue increase of 660% on the same period last year, and an average increase in visits to their websites of over 1,000%. All of this was achieved before we even reached the busy Christmas period of December. So why do you think people got invested in the Buy from the Bush initiative? And even 6 years on, why do you think people are still committed to it?
I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this, but timing has a lot to do with it. It was really great timing. I think people actually want to help, and people in the city wanted to help, but they needed to be enabled, and it needed to be spelt out really simply for them. Buy from the Bush is a really clear call to action, and we never wavered from that call to action. So we were really clear about not being a charity. This was about, here's a beautiful handbag from this town in this community, and when you buy it, this is the ripple effect of your investment. And we always use that phrase. We explicitly ask people to become advocates for us, and I think because it's really hard to sell something that you've got a stake, that's yours. But because I was selling on behalf of these talented small business owners, it wasn't my product. And likewise, people who we were asking to get on board were becoming advocates for others and for communities. And I mean, I suspect you all know this from the work you do, but people really want that opportunity. They just don't always know how to get it. In truth, and to be specific, PR really helped. So we worked very, very hard to garner PR reach, and that's why timing was everything, because I think at that time the media needed a good news story, and we were achieving traction, and the numbers helped, and all of those things really helped. So I think there was a combination of luck, incredible community investment and goodwill, and compelling storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have said before, I've got my little Buy from the Bush rep on. Shameless plug, Stella Evans, Art and Design from Burrawell.
So cool.
Yeah,
Stella.
yeah. One of our alumni. So if anyone wants to have a look at my headscarf, it's Stella's. The theme for today's conference is Let's Thrive Together. Buy from the Bush was an example of, I would say regional Australia, but all of Australia coming together during a stressful period of drought. Thanks, Anna. What is the secret to building a thriving initiative, especially one that involves bringing people together, sometimes geographically, for a common goal?
Again, I suspect you guys could tell this story as well as I could, but I think in our case it is about inclusivity, gratitude, storytelling, and being really explicit in what we needed and what the impact of that would be. I think I was uniquely positioned because I'd grown up in the city and I'd moved to the bush to pitch in an inclusive way about how people in the city could help and what they needed to understand. I think at the time that we launched, there were some other campaigns around the drought that I think served to isolate the city from the bush experience. So sometimes I think because there's a feeling that, my God, they don't understand what we're going through, sometimes we pit ourselves against people in the city. And I actually think that to get buy-in, they need to feel very needed and know how grateful we are for their contribution. And that's something that we've tried to do. I also, not consciously, but instinctively felt that it needed to be a community and not driven by individuals. So early on, people would, I think, human nature is that you want to know who's behind something, and people would say, who is this? Who are you? Please put your face to this organisation. And I felt that the brand needed to be a community of people and a community of talented business owners in regional Australia, so that when people were supporting us, they weren't supporting one person, they were supporting a community. And in doing that, I think there was this, I think we were kind of leading from the middle. The small businesses, the customers, the community felt that they were all trying to achieve something along with, the tiny organisation that we were at Buy from the Bush. So, I'm talking now as if it was all strategic. I don't think it was. I think it was kind of instinct, but that idea of allowing people in, educating them, explaining to them, allowing understanding, and then asking for their help. I think that has benefited us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to sort of get onto that storytelling theme, in your Same Australia Day address, and I'm going to reference it a few times, and if you haven't read it, please do, or watch it. There's both visuals. You mentioned so often when we talk about the bush, the rhetoric is around the battler. As Australians, we need to start telling a different story about the bush. To you in 2024, what's that story that we need to be telling?
Largely, it's about potential and not pity. I think too often we're framed around that poor bugger narrative when I, as somebody who grew up in the city and moved here, think we're lucky buggers. So it's not productive to keep, I mean, I think challenge is kind of what defines rural Australia, but I don't think we do a good enough job of self-promotion, actually. So I think it's about potential. I think it's about this unique value proposition that we can offer the world, not just people in Sydney. And I hope that it's a more diverse, layered, nuanced story, because I think crisis is part of our story, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about regional communities, and you've probably done, I don't even want to think about the...
Sorry, can I just, one other thing that I wanted to say is that it is and has been a very masculine brand, the bush. And by no means do I think we should scrap it and start again, but to layer it with understanding about how that masculine story lives alongside an incredible feminine story is really important also. I think from a consumer perspective, from an investment perspective, from a fundraising perspective, that kind of telling the story of diversity and layering that romantic idea of rural Australia, layering it with some modern realities is kind of what we try and do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when we talk about regional communities, and we have so many represented here from Burrawa to Grenfell to Great Lakes to Port Lincoln to Coolah, there's a lot. With all the communities being so diverse, and I'm sure all our volunteers, you know the unique traits and quirks of their local communities, and them all having their own unique personalities, where do you see the beauty of a regional community actually exists?
I am somebody who thinks we should distinguish between regional, rural and remote. I don't think there's a universal experience. And in fact, I recently moved from 70 k's on the northwest side of Warren, so near Quambone, to, 50 k's on the eastern side, closer to Trangie. And the experience is vastly different. I'm only an hour from a regional centre of Dubbo. I'm closer to town, I'm closer to services. As a result, my neighbours we don't have as strong a connection. We're not as vitally reliant on each other. You can get trades. There are all these things that you can get that little bit closer to town. So that's one micro example. I think regional centres have their own challenges and their own opportunities. And the more we refine the conversation, and I've partnered with multinationals at Buy from the Bush, with Visa and PayPal and Meta, and I've been in meetings with dozens of people on the line and me on the other end with limited experience in what they're talking about. But if they use the word regional in our branding, I always ask for them to change it to rural, because what we were trying to do at Buy from the Bush is to tell a rural story, and inclusive of the remote communities, but more so people who don't have foot traffic like regional centres do. I was in before Buy from the Bush, I pitched an online business in an accelerator program and spent 8 consecutive weeks travelling to Newcastle for a regional accelerator program where we were trying to get investment into our digital startup. And when I got to Newcastle and I met the other regional startups, I was giggling. Like, we were not facing the same. They all lived in Newcastle or the Upper Hunter. Not the Upper Hunter, the Hunter. They had access to so much education, so many services. They could potentially run into an investor in an elevator and give an elevator pitch. In Warren, there's no elevators, it's all one story, and there's no investors necessarily. And I remember being in the startup hub in York Street in Sydney and pitching to a government person, a business that had great legs and had great traction and still had no investment. And the government representative said, listen, if you were in this building with the stats that you've just given me, you would have investment. And it was this, I think that was laying foundation for understanding the challenges that small and micro businesses face when they are outside regional centres, outside urban centres. So I think there is definitely a brand that we can sell of regional Australia, getting outside, getting off the beaten track, leaving the city. But beyond that, I believe in-depth understanding of what is different between living in Dubbo and living in Walgett, or living in Orange and living even in Boorowa, which is so nearby. They're different experiences, and we should paint those experiences with colour so that people in the city get it.
Yeah, and I think something really interesting that you did on the Buy From the Bush Instagram was starting to highlight different personalities, and I feel like you just ran into people out the front of the post office and was just like, hey, can I film you? And it was your local builder, it was a woman who's been on the land for 50 years. If you go onto the Instagram, you can see it. It's like running into someone out the front of your local IGA pretty much, and you're only going in for 2 litres of milk and then you're there half an hour later. That's happened in Grenfell before, I'm not going to lie. Why do you think that resonated with people? Do you think people are really connected to that human impact? And I won't talk about the slogan that was on, I think it was the Builders t-shirt.
I think that the almost the most marketable commodity we have in the bush is people. The characters I've met in rural Australia are so unique, so quirky, offer so much insight and wisdom wrapped up in pretty rough and ready packages. It's not the gloss that you necessarily expect when you put together a marketing campaign. But I think if you want to foster understanding, and it's all a I hate the word journey. It's a pathway of storytelling. So we started with handbags and impact data, and eventually we've got a warm audience who care about rural Australia. And now I'm going to tell you about the experiences of people who live here and what they offer. And there's no shortage of people I think deserve a television show in Warren. So if I can be their funnel to that, I will be. My particular kind of interest lies in those conversations, like whether it actually serves our customer is less interesting to me than the experience of conversing with these people and editing a video that displays their quirk, because it's so fun and it's kind of a creative joy for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the topic of regional communities, and I think everyone sitting in this room has a passion for ensuring that regional communities are not only going to survive but thrive well into the future, word of the day, and with the right skills and training. So what industries and skills do you see regional communities are going to need to ensure their sustainability but also growth into the future?
Can I ask, I find this a difficult question to answer, and I'd ask you all to take up your pen, and if I said the word thrive within the context of your rural community, can you just write down 3 things that come to mind of a thriving rural community? I'm going to give you 15 seconds. Okay, pens down. Because I'm going to start by saying I think thriving is subjective, and which is great, because I think a diversity of perspective is what we need. Because you were hitting me with such big questions, I posed some of these questions to our Buy From the Bush community on our Instagram yesterday. And of course, the responses were diverse. There are the obvious answers of education, which you know more than anyone, health, housing. Like, they are 3 fundamental things that we all need to thrive in rural Australia. But I believe in the livability factor. I don't know which one comes first, because in Warren we need teachers and we need nurses, but we need them to want to live where we live. And so I'm concerned with, at Buy From the Bush, our efforts go towards that kind of building a robust community that is livable and feels hospitable, because I think that's really important. So could I ask brave people to tell me what they said for thriving? You can just shout them out. Yeah.
I had connections, commitment, and welcoming or warmth.
Yes. Anybody else?
I have community belonging.
Great.
That sense of belonging.
Yes.
A demographic that was from young to old, not just
Diversity. Yes.
I had spirit.
Spirit. See, how hard is that to put in a report or to ask for funding? This is the thing. Yes. No, I mean, I would put something very similar, but sorry, anyone else?
Caring for community.
Yes.
Wanting to be involved, which is energy, time, all those things.
Yes. Anyone else? Healthy and secure. Yes.
I had access.
Access. And what, yeah, no, talk more about access.
Access to the things that are that give you access to the connection, to give education, to everything else that's been mentioned. Just making sure people have access to that community, I suppose.
Yes. I hope that all resonates with you, because I think the answer is people are what facilitate a community thriving, and fostering talent and energy and opportunity in people, which is exactly what you do, leads to a thriving community. And it's what we do at Bite from the Bush. In some senses, that asset-based community development is what your organisation and our organisation share.
Thank you for sharing my questions on Instagram. I felt like a bit of a celebrity overnight.
I should have tagged you. Sorry.
It's all right. You tag Country Education Foundation, so that's fine. This next question you also put up on your Instagram, and you wrote a column in Gracie Her magazine, which I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are familiar with, and it was titled "The Stayers." And I think this line would resonate with a lot of people in the room. And you said, "There is a certain responsibility that comes with life in a small town. Each person plays their role in the health of the place. You are an individual on the census, a customer in the supermarket, a patient keeping the hospital going, one more family at the local school, a committee member, a teacher, a priest." How do we ensure, how do we ensure that our young people want to return, but also want to stay in the regions? I'd be curious to hear your response, but then maybe some of the responses you also received on Instagram, which apparently are still coming through.
They sure are. My response is, it's about, again, a livable place. So places that people want to be, where they feel like they can be who they want to be and do what they want to do. When I married Jack, people asked me if I was going to be a teacher or a nurse, and told me that there were always opportunities for teachers and nurses in the bush. And I had just done a 5-year degree in management and international studies, and I majored in Chile. So I thought I was signing up to doing nothing with my inverted commas skills. I thought that I would kind of do whatever I could when I got out there. And in fact, what I learnt was that living where we live, you actually get, necessarily, you apply your skills in new ways, you have space to create. 97% of the women in our community, 97% of the business owners in our community are women. And I think that is largely because their life didn't take them where they thought they might go. So they start to think, well, shivers, what do I want to do? And they actually have the opportunity to do what they want to do. And the more that our infrastructure, our services, our business community can facilitate people doing what they want to do in the bush, the better our talent pool will be, the better our lives will be. And I think it's weirdly this past experience in an online platform connecting agricultural job seekers with farmers and agricultural employers, I saw that geography matters a lot in terms of job applications. So if I was trying to recruit for a job north of Narromine, I got about a fifth of the applications as I did for jobs that were further south and closer to services, closer to pubs, closer to friends. So, and some of the responses we got through last night was pub culture on a Friday night, making people feel welcome. And I think it could be so simple. If you turned up in Parliament and said, we need pubs in the bush, they'd laugh at you. And yet, having employed now many, many young men and women on farms, if they can't get to the pub on a Friday night because it's 80 k's from town as opposed to 50, they want that 50k job, because connecting with people on a Friday night is really important. And so that's why I talk about, I'm not sure whether housing, health and education can be separated from coffee, beer, friendship, sport, community networks. All of those things need to have a place at the kind of in the conversation. In terms of the responses from people, I think, yeah, largely it came back to some interesting perspectives were the older generation helping to break down that barrier, people feeling welcome. I know one of the most engaged conversations we've ever had on Buy from the Bush was actually, you know, I posted something about there's these co-working spaces in rural Australia. Get on the road, come out here and work from these incredible offices, you know, nothing's stopping you. And that conversation led to people who said, I tried to live in a country town. I found it unfriendly. It was really hard being single. I felt I needed a man to meet anybody. I felt I needed a child to meet anybody. And it was a bit of a confronting conversation for the community, I thought, but a really fruitful one, because I think I've been in rooms where we talk about regional policy, and often those soft elements of hospitality, relationships, and women feeling like they have a role if they're not attached to a farmer. In fact, people feeling like they have a role if they're not in farming or in a traditional industry. Feeling welcomed if you are an AMBO or a teacher and you're not fourth generation. All of those things need to shift a little bit, and we need to be a bit honest about them if we want young people to stay and actually move out here.
Absolutely. We have some of our lovely alumni in the room, and even for the volunteers who are dealing with, you know, regional young people on a daily basis, what advice would you give to a regional young person on the cusp of taking that next step into their career?
I would say ask questions, because and acquire skills not for a specific purpose, but because those skills all add up to something. You've got time for purpose, you've got time for your kind of your reason for being, but in the meantime, ask questions, have conversations, and acquire skills that might seem really random, because I think sometimes all of those lived experiences actually contribute to what you're meant to be doing in life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to refer to your famous Australia Day address again. But you said something as part of that which resonates so closely with CEF and our community-based model and our volunteers. And again, I'm just going to look down at my paper so I actually get it right. The very foundation of Australian identity, so present in the bush, is about doing. It's about helping. It's about solving problems. It's a modest, practical kindness. It's getting stuck in. We are a country of people who want to help each other, and what a triumph that is. That ordinary people can have extraordinary impact and even greater triumph. These are the very foundations of our society. And when I read that, I really wanted to share that part of the speech, because I think it reflects all our volunteers sitting in the room today and what they do in terms of being champions and empowering young people in their communities to pursue further education. what would your message be to our wonderful volunteers in the room today? Loaded question.
I'm full of messages, but no, I just would like to say thank you. I think I believe in what you're doing. I believe in kind of micro investment having a macro impact. You invest in individuals and you trust that they will contribute to their community, and I think there's no greater investment, so thank you. I encourage you to, I find your model so fascinating and impressive, and the idea that you operate in isolation from one another, the committees, but you come together like this to share with one another. And as individuals on your committees and in your community, I think there's such value in understanding what your individual value proposition is to that committee and to your community. So what is it that you do that nobody else can do, or that you know you have to offer, but it might not live on the job description? Because I think if you're tapping into that, which can sometimes feel super random, but I think that's where we really realise our potential as a group. And I feel like that needs to be illustrated because it sounds too conceptual, but in my case, I am the youngest of 5 kids, and I was the person in the family who always went with mum to shop for my sisters and my brother at Christmas. So I got a sense of what other people liked that wasn't my own taste, but I kind of enjoyed the idea of styling and curating for others, and weirdly, that has fed into Buy from the Bush. That's what we do. We curate things and have confidence that there's a customer out there who wants and needs that thing. I loved writing, but I didn't do it in my work. I didn't mind speaking. I had no idea if I could do media, but once I started doing media, I thought, well, this isn't that hard. I had worked in community development and then ag tech, and to me they were so random, and yet there were themes and skills that I'd acquired from those different contexts that I absolutely needed in this job. And so all of this kind of weird collection of things came together, and also this social capital of being born in the city, going to school there, moving to the bush, and being able to be confident in asking people in the city to care about my new life. So Buy from the Bush is evidence of when you really understand what you've got to offer, and then being unashamedly kind of committed to engaging those skills. I think incredible things can come of it, and that's exactly how I approach building a team and engaging volunteers, which we do often, even though we're not a charity. It's about what does this person have to offer me? What can they do so well that I can't do? And how can I build a role or a project around that talent? Because then we're going to see impact.
Absolutely. And my final question.
Sorry, I've got one more thing. I'm so
that's
sorry,
right.
it's so long. But there's just one other thing that we probably haven't touched on, and it's more of an organisational insight, that extending the story, like constantly evolving the story of impact. So we started with drought, bushfires hit, COVID hit, and at each time we had to make sure that the story that we told people and the brand that we built was relevant and poignant. And so making sure that your story of impact, your story of purpose is constantly evolving, not necessarily changing, but evolving in the way you communicate it to fundraisers, to community, to volunteers, because I think there's opportunities in, and we use PR, so we were thinking about PR angles. What is relevant in the national conversation or in the media at the moment that we can tap into and therefore get PR reach, and constantly scrutinising the story that you're telling, because I think remaining relevant and connected and meaningful is vital.
Thank you for that interruption, because I was just taking notes, writing things down. My final question before we open up to the room for questions, and again, might be a bit of a big one, and you also did reach out to your Instagram community, I think, about this one.
Yeah.
What is your hope for regional communities, and where would you like to see regional Australia in years to come?
Yeah, I think I feel like I've answered this somewhat, but I do hope that it is a place that people believe they can do almost anything from the middle of nowhere. I hope that we start being honest with ourselves in rural Australia about what our challenges are, what our opportunities are, what our brand, in inverted commas, can be. I really believe in branding, and I know, people, when I say branding, people might see a logo or a colour or an icon. What I mean by that is a brand lives in the perceptions of your customers or your users or your clients. So what do they believe that you are? And is it meaningful to them? And I think the Bush needs to be conscious of our brand, to be shaping it in a way that is modern, appealing, diverse, layered, and I hope that it is one that includes a diversity of ideas and perspectives, because I think sometimes the smallness of rural Australia can get in our way, and our modesty can really get in our way. So I hope we sell a big story about what we can be.
Absolutely. So we're going to open up for questions. I would say that if you would like to ask a question, that you introduce yourself and where you're from as well. So if anyone has any questions for Grace.
Grace, John O'Forrest from Snowden Narrow, not far from here, but sort of relatively small community.
Yes.
Probably just a question around interaction with government and potential donors and things. I'm really interested in your thoughts around that difference between regional and rural, because I've been involved in a body before where they sort of saw regional as Newcastle and Wollongong, Toowoomba and these bigger places, and the battle of trying to present that a smaller community has greater needs. Just in your interactions with government and others, how have you found the best way to get that message across, that there is that distinction between larger regional centres and communities and the smaller rural communities and their needs?
I'd say we haven't done it. We've never received any government funding or government support really, so I haven't done it very well, nor put a lot of energy there, because we're slightly different in our nature, but I don't think they care, if I'm honest, the difference. I mean, from a funding perspective and from a conversation perspective, regional to them is rural. So my approach is starting from the ground up, from the kind of user base, from the consumer base, and painting a subtle picture of difference there. I hope that I'm fostering understanding at a community level, at a government level, and so I can talk in terms of partnerships, because with corporate partners, at that moment when I stopped the meeting and said, can you delete regional and add rural, it happened 3 times, and then finally the kind of boss at the other end said, okay, you've got to tell us the difference, it means nothing to us. And so I tried to explain to them in that moment, and for me it also meant imagery, so vision. I think if you're going to, brand campaigns, they were sometimes using stock images that could have been anywhere, and I made sure that I would kind of give them imagery of an actual rural setting in Western New South Wales that was actually suffering from drought, and so they needed to see it really visually. I told them stories about getting a snake bite when you're 70 k's from town versus some of the different challenges when you live in a regional centre. I'm not saying one is harder or easier than the other. In fact, I really hate that conversation about which one's harder. It's more about what the unique challenges are. So I think with partners, I had to make it commercially appealing for them to care about the difference. So this is a branding, if we nail this, then we are presenting a really kind of romantic, beautiful, unique, bespoke, as opposed to this image and this regional perspective, which is generic and people won't engage with. So I had to paint a commercial, a kind of business case to them, Government, I really can't speak to, unfortunately.
Dougal get it. I'm from Sydney, actually.
Oh, great.
We've still got pubs on Friday night. No one goes to them. If I suspect no politician has ever asked you this question, but if they were listening to that same conversation 5 years ago when you were listening to the bloke handing out the money, where do you see governments can be of greater assistance, both state, local, and federal? I mean, what can they do other than give out the money? I'm wanting advice.
Actually, Bronnie Taylor, who was our State Minister for Women at the time, did call me up and ask for coffee and say, what do you need? And I was so naive, I didn't say money, I said childcare. And and now they've got some childcare review, and she came up to me and said, oh, you told me, but it's like, oh my God, I needed money, I should have just said that. But there are practical solutions, i.e. where I live, there is no afternoon school care and no holiday school care. So if you are working in if you really want to build a small or micro business, you do it within school hours, which is incredibly limiting. That is one thing that I think is a government role. I think that there needs to be an understanding. When I moved, I worked for the state government in a community development role, and it was a shift in my focus about the numbers game, so the kind of per head investment game that I think you have to speak if you're in politics. So when I was running this athlete pathway program, the Far West Academy of Sport, and I remember my staff kind of complaining to me, oh, they'll never give us the money for that. We can't, because when I arrived, kids were camping on the floor doing 4 hours of, like they travelled in from Broken Hill, they camped on the floor, they'd do training for 4 to 6 hours, which I knew was counterproductive if you're in an elite athlete pathway. Like 4 hours of training or 6 hours of training at that age is not great for you. It should be shorter and sharper and more targeted. And it was a slow unravelling of all these things I'd learnt living in the city and working in the city, and then living with the challenges of remote communities. And so my staff would complain about the lack of investment, and in my head I was like, well, they can't send out 4 people when we've got 16 people here at this camp, and Western Sydney they've got 400. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. But now, 15 years on, having lived in the bush, I do think they should send 6 people out for the 16 people in. So it is a paradigm shift in terms of a per head ratio of investment, and starting to think about the impact and the potential of these communities and the skill sets within them. I think that's a shift that government could make. In terms of specific policy, there is micro business that doesn't fit a lot of kind of funding models or policy models. There's seedlings of idea, women and men in the bush with loads of potential that need the gap filled between their micro seed and where they can access government support. And I think there's whenever I kind of trying to talk to funding or investment or even kind of grant applications, it's hard to prove the value because the numbers aren't there and the size of the business is so small. And so my way around that is to go to big business like PayPal and say, can we do a buy from the bush big break where we invest in people's business ideas that may not have IP attached and may not fit into the ag tech kind of funding bucket, but they're so worthwhile and they've got, they could potentially have great legs. Just give us $30,000 and we'll give it. So trying to kind of sell the commerciality of that goodwill to corporates. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
I mean, at the bottom line, governments will talk about money. Whether that money comes from a federal government, state government, or the local. If you need those people in those communities, who is the best person? Who's the best entity to provide those services?
But I also think they talk about money in a broad sense of numbers equal impact, and numbers don't equal impact. Quality, market fit, a need being, a problem being solved at a local level, those things equal impact. And that's where there's a big gap in the conversation, because I can't we just did a project where we took, maybe 8 fashion designers down to Bird's Nest in Cooma. Jane Kay, who I know has a connection with this organisation, I think, is the founder of Bird's Nest and an incredible businesswoman and has mentored me a little bit. And our idea was a very small group going down to learn from the best, to learn their systems, their learnings, their failures, their successes, and then go back to their community and their businesses and carry on, I suppose, with that new insight. Now, those kind of projects, and we've just done it again with creatives, a bunch of rural storytellers and creatives, they don't have a lot of appeal to either commercial investment or sponsorship or government, because you can't speak to numbers, you can't speak to this many people have. So somehow, either we need to do a better story of explaining how this micro project can equal this macro impact, or government need to be more flexible in their investment in terms of understanding the value of their dollar and asking questions at a local level.
It's investment.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. A huge reward.
Any other questions?
May I ask one? Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm from Orange. You know how to get the community to act and move, and Buy from the Bush is a perfect example of that. Would you have any advice to the volunteers in the room, how they can go back to their community and try and bring the community on board with the CEF and education?
I'm so reluctant because maybe you've tried everything. But my instincts are that colour, so stories of impact that really illustrate what you do, are the best way to get people involved. You must paint a picture and not ask for anything. A little, like paint the picture, then ask for something. One of the challenges of smaller rural communities as opposed to bigger regional centres is that every single person who's a doer in a community is on 6 committees and stretched. And so I know the challenge is very significant, and I know it's not as simple as painting a picture. I think ego does come into charity and to volunteering, and I think the example of Temora was an excellent one, where people feel like heroes when they're and being celebrated. I really believe in the value of that for getting people involved and recruiting. I also think that visuals matter. So this is, maybe you've talked about this so many times, but visuals, video, social media, building an email list, telling stories of impact, getting those people who have enjoyed the rewards of this organisation to tell it in their own words, sometimes not sugarcoating it, sometimes actually telling a very honest and raw perspective works. I think that, I feel like that might be, I had something really specific when you started and it's gone, but it'll come back to me.
It's always fun doing these talks right before lunch for that reason. Are there any other final, Nick?
Well, just this question from Dougal on getting government, and government is interested in numbers, but of course the impact is a percentage of the community you're impacting. So if you're impacting Burra, 2,000, let's call it 2,000 people, and if you're having an impact on 8%, it might be the youthful component of that might be 250, you're impacting a very significant proportion of that community. I think we've just got to change the metric that it's around. Here's a really funny, strange thought. Every time I fly out of Australia, you fly diagonally from Sydney, hit somewhere between Darwin and you sit there and you look for 3.5, 4 hours at this massive expanse. We, as a country, will not be able to sustain our sovereignty unless we protect all of that in the middle. we've got to do things with it. We've got to protect its environment, we've got to protect the social structures that are in there, we've got the infrastructure, roads and railway. It just doesn't happen the way we approach it and categorising. And I love your example of regional. You've pulled me up on that because that's a really important point. We've been dumbed down and classified, and I think we've really lost our impact as a result of that. So I think you've given us so much to think about.
Thank you. I've thought of the thing. Can I add it?
Of course you can.
When I moved to Warren, there were businesses galore hidden in strange old buildings, and none of them told me what they did. I didn't know where the hairdresser was, but everybody else seemed to, so they could book a hair appointment, go to the hairdresser, which happened to be down the lane behind the pub with carpet on the walls, and I couldn't ever find the carpet on the walls. People say, you know, the one with the carpet on the walls. It's like, no, where is it? And it's a small town. One day, an accountancy firm run by two young women put an A-frame on the street saying, "We do tax." And for the first time I knew what that brick building was. And I think it is a good example of where we go wrong in rural Australia, that because we all know each other, because we know each other's history, because we know where that family, from what they do, what their value is, we stop saying it out loud. We stop telling people. We stop promoting. In fact, I think we hate promoting. So as an organisation, looking for volunteers, because the CEF, because Justy Fleming is my cousin, I've known about your organisation for a long time and I've been in your orbit, but that doesn't mean I've understood what you did and what your value was. So being super explicit about what you do for your community and why should people care, I think you can never overthink that. That's my final point on that.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yes.
I think that the population in this country is built on volunteering. But 50% won't volunteer, but you tap them on the shoulder, they'll do anything. And I think we've got to learn to ask the question and put them in a position. They don't think, they haven't got we've been built not to promote ourselves.
That's right. And what is the call to action? What are you asking? And how can you make that as succinct and appealing as possible? Yeah.
Whether it's cooking a barbecue or whether it's, they'll do it happily. In fact, most people want to be useful.
It's like the voicemail that you get that says, "I'm so-and-so, can you give us a call?" I mean, does anyone ever want to call that person back? Give me a reason why you want me to call you back. I think that's exactly what you're saying.
Sorry, I talk way too much.
No, I feel like we could sit here all day, personally. But I believe you're sticking around for lunch, so I hope you get a chance to eat lunch, because no doubt people want to ask you more questions. But on behalf of the CEF community, we wanted to say a huge thank you for giving up your weekend. No doubt the hours of time in the car from Warren, travelling down to Canberra. We do have a small token of our appreciation. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No, all good.
Thanks, everyone.
I think I'm throwing back to Lisa.
Yes,